All right. We commence your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Guest. Good afternoon. As you know, Mr. Guest, my name is Richard Soldinger. I represent the defendants in this case. As you alluded to in your direct examination, you did used to work for NJ Electric, correct?
I did, yes.
And your position there was eliminated?
Yes.
And you were certainly disappointed that that occurred, correct, sir?
I don't know if that's correct words. I mean, Rose, I guess, a little disappointed that your job's over.
And you felt you had been underutilized when you were at NJ Electric?
I felt that I could have maybe done a little bit more for them.
Okay, so you felt they underutilized you, correct?
I thought I could have done more to help him, maybe even go further.
And when you were at NJ Electric, you were actually exposed to some of NJ Electric's costs, correct?
Oh, yes.
And you were exposed to some of NJ Electric's labor units, correct?
I didn't quite understand them, but yes.
And you were exposed to NJ Electric's T&M rates, correct?
I would imagine at times I would run across them, yes.
But it's your testimony as you sit here today, you do not know what NJ Electric might bid on a project, right? You have no idea, correct?
On what type of project?
Any type of project. You know what type of, there's a new project, you would know what NJ Electric might bid on that project. You know you previously worked there, right?
T&M or a hard money contract?
Any type of contract.
Well, I wouldn't have access to that information.
And one of the reasons that you wouldn't know what NJ Electric might bid is you certainly don't know what NJ Electric's strategic plans are for estimating, correct?
No, I don't have access to that information. Correct.
Right, and a company's strategic plans is one of the many, many factors that goes into estimating, correct?
Into estimating?
Into doing an estimate. What a company will estimate their strategic plans, one of the factors the company will consider when making an estimate, correct?
I guess I'm not sure how that would be used.
And I spoke at a deposition, Mr. Guest. You asked me questions and you giving answers for several hours.
Quite a few hours, yes.
Question, page 297, line 20. To your knowledge, as someone who's the president of Sargent Electric, are strategic plans something that goes into bidding? Company strategic plans is one of the factors. It could be of a company. So you would agree that's one of the factors that goes into estimating, correct? A company's strategic plans.
Just like I mentioned, it could be. There's a lot of determining factors that it would be.
And there's a whole host of factors, Mr. Guest, that goes into an estimate, correct?
There are, correct.
Now, you realize that there have been more than one complaint that's been filed in this case by Sargent Electric against the defendants, correct?
I don't understand what you mean by more than one complaint.
Okay, why don't you take a look, if you can, at Trial Exhibit 155, please. You there?
Yes.
Okay. Take a look at the first page of this document, Mr. Guest, and take a look at the last page of the document, if you would. Your Honor's report at 155?
I'll get there.
I looked at the first page on the last page.
No, wait for the report to catch up, and then last page.
Okay.
Recognize this document as verified complaints. The first complaint filed by Sargent Electric against the defendants.
Yes, I do.
And that's your signature as the verification at the very last page?
It is, yes.
And you verified that the statements made in the complaint were true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, counsel, if I can just interrupt with an objection. I certainly understand that the court can take notice of this pleading, that it can take notice of the date it was filed, that Mr. Guest has signed off on it, but to the extent that there are facts or allegations contained in this complaint An amended complaint has been filed, which, for all intents and purposes, replaces all the allegations and facts contained in the initial complaint. This initial complaint is no longer valid before this court.
Your Honor, this actually goes with the credibility of the witness. He verified this complaint, made a series of allegations, none of which we believe are true, none of which there's a factual basis for at the time he made it, and I think it goes to the credibility of anything Mr. Guest has to say.
Okay, are we going to do the move out and cross? Or redirect?
Do you recall in the original complaint that you accused Mr. Frame of soliciting Sargent employees for employment at MJ Electric prior to his departure? Remember that allegation in the complaint? I'm asking if you recall it.
That particular question is we talked for hours, and I don't remember that exact question.
Okay, well, I'll point you out to the paragraph in, actually, look at paragraph 17. Paragraph 17 states, Mr. Guest, by way of example, after Frame accepted employment with MJ, but while still employed by Sargent, he openly began soliciting other key management employees of Sargent to leave their employment with Sargent and accept employment with MJ, including several key management employees who subsequently have resigned from Sargent Electric. So you can read paragraph 17. Correct, Mr. Guest? See it there?
Yes, I just read that.
And you had absolutely no knowledge of Mr. Frame soliciting any Sargent employees for employment at MJ prior to his departure, correct?
Prior to his departure?
Yes, sir.
Not that I'm aware of, okay.
And in fact, you personally never conducted an investigation to determine whether or not Mr. Frame had solicited any Sargent employees before he left Sargent, right?
I don't know how I would investigate that. I mean, we talked to people, but I didn't go around and ask everyone if they've been solicited.
And Mr. Lino has never told you that any such solicitation occurred by Mr. Frame prior to Mr. Frame leaving Sargent, right?
I didn't have conversations with Mr. Lino. I looked at him for a general counsel, but direct conversation with Mr. Lino, no. Is there forensics? Off the top of my head, I can't think of any.
So what forensics are certainly reflected in Mr. Lino's report, which speaks for itself. You're not aware of any email communications between Mr. Frame and any of the former Sargent employees wherein prior to his departure, Mr. Frame is soliciting them to leave. You're not aware of any such email communications, correct?
Not soliciting, just emails that they sent back.
But no solicitation.
I don't know of solicitation.
Right. You're not aware of any telephone communications between Mr. Frame and any of the former Sargent employees where Mr. Frame is soliciting any of them to leave, correct?
No, we didn't have phone records to do that.
Okay. But yet, 17 made it very clear in the complaint that you signed, it's not even on information and belief. Black and white, by way of example, Frame accepted employment with MJ, but while still employed by Sargent, he openly began soliciting other key management employees. Let's talk about, Mr. Guest, you cannot point me to any contract, any current contract that Sargent has with one of its customers that MJ has interfered with. Not one, correct?
I don't know what they're working on.
So your answer is yes, you cannot point me to any current contract that MJ Electric has interfered with, right?
No, I don't have their information on contract that either.
And none of Sargent's customers have terminated the contracts prematurely, correct, as a result of the actions of MJ Electric?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so for the current contracts, Sargent is either continuing to work or they've completed the work on the contract, correct?
We continue to work on our contracts, correct?
Let's talk about the 9 boxes that you spoke about in response to questions from Ms. King. Sargent has possession of these 9 boxes, right?
They were in our counsel's office.
Okay, and they were returned by Mr. Frame prior to his departure, correct?
They were returned by Mr. Wright to our office, not by Mr. Frame.
And you believe that they were stored at a warehouse, but not a Sargent facility. Is that your testimony?
That's my understanding.
Did you ever go out and take a look at that warehouse, Mr. Guest?
Not inside, I just drove by the outside.
And are you aware that Sargent was leasing space from T.R.O Properties at that precise location?
We were in a tenant, so we had tenant ABC, A being the first one on the left, which would have been owners, B, I'm not sure what they go by designation. We were in the center unit, and unit C would have been non-occupied.
Okay, so you have no idea where those boxes were stored. You're relying on what Mr. Wright told you as far as where he put the boxes, correct?
That's true.
And Mr. Wright was telling you that they were stored certainly in the same building under the same roof as the space being leased by Sargent, correct?
They were stored in a different tenant space than our tenant space.
Right. You can answer my question. They were stored under the same roof in the same building where Sargent was leasing space, correct?
I don't know how that building is built. It was in a wall dividing our unit and the other unit, and it was stored in Unit A. Are they under the same roof? Look directly above, no. But there is a roof on the whole building, yes.
I certainly hope so. And you believe that the materials in these boxes, Mr. Guest, it's your theory, you're telling the court that you think Mr. Frame copied materials out of these boxes before they were returned back to Sargent, correct? That's your accusation?
I don't know why, for any reason, they wouldn't leave our facility. I mean, these are confidential information. So did I witness him copying those boxes? No. I have no idea why they would be removed from our site. The only reason they should have been to be shredded. I don't physically have documents that were copied. I just don't know why they left our building. For whatever reasons. That's the only reason that I could conclude.
So because you can't come up with a reason why the boxes were moved, you believe Mr. Frame copied those documents and had stolen Sargent information, right? That's your conclusion.
That's a possibility they could have been, yes.
Well, that's not a possibility. That's what you believe happened.
I don't know. I think
You don't know?
I don't have physical proof.
Okay. Now, Mr. Frame at the time was the general manager of that Northwest Indiana office?
And vice president, yes.
Okay. And he was running the office, correct?
He was responsible for the SG&A and P&L, that division, correct?
He was one of the two bosses of that office, correct?
He was responsible for that division.
And just so I understand your testimony, despite Mr. Frame's authority, the fact that he'd been with Sargent for 25 years and brought in hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue in, you think that he needed to ask for approval before putting some of the stuff in his own office in boxes, wrapping those boxes up, and putting them in a warehouse facility off-site. You think he should have gone and asked for someone's approval. That's your testimony, correct?
Correct.
Let's talk a little more about the 9 boxes. And Mr. Wright told you that when they were sent to this warehouse, they were mounted on a pallet and wrapped up, correct?
Correct.
And he also told you that they were still wrapped up when you picked them up and brought the boxes back, correct?
They had wrapping on, correct.
And in fact, you didn't even ask Mr. Wright if they were in any type of different condition from the time he had dropped them off to the time that he brought them back. You didn't even ask him that question, correct?
No, that's not correct. He wasn't sure if they were in the same condition. They were wrapped in similar wrapping.
Similar wrapping.
Correct.
Page 287, line 12. Did you ask Mr. Wright if they were in any type of different condition from the time that you dropped them off to the time that Mr. Wright brought them back? Answer: I did not ask him. And when the boxes were returned, Mr. Guest, you don't know if anything was missing from them, correct?
No, I did not, because I didn't look at the boxes before they left our facility. They left on the first week of January, and I wasn't in the complex.
Right. You can't think of any possible reason why Mr. Frame would move those boxes other than for the purpose of copying information that's in the boxes and stealing that information. Right, Mr. Guest? That's your view?
It just seems pretty awkward that he was also during that period possibly looking at employment. So when I saw that 14th business plan, then the business plan would go in previous copies. It just be a pretty clear, weird coincidence, and they're all happening at the same time. And so you do draw conclusions. No question about it. People are leaving. We have devices missing. We have boxes missing. There are a lot of components.
Okay, let's talk about your investigation that was conducted. Remember also verifying another pleading in this case called answers to interrogatories. Does that ring a bell?
It doesn't, but it
doesn't.
You can refer me.
Happy. Sounds like 106 first.
106.
Okay.
I don't know.
Let's talk a little bit about your investigation. You know when you're there, Your Honor? Let me know when you're there, please. Your Honor, thank you. Again, Mr. Guest, try to move this along. Just look at the first page and the last page, if you would. I'm sorry, I would go with first page and second to last page. Recognize this document?
I'd have to read it all over again, but I remember I did sign it. That is my signature.
Okay. And show me page 10 of the document, please, Mr. Guest. And the question was, I'm going to paraphrase a bit, if I can. Describe in detail the basis for Sargent's allegation that Frame allegedly misappropriated, quote, massive amounts of Sargent Electric's confidential and proprietary data. And in your response to this, you mentioned 9 Baker's boxes, you mentioned a 1 terabyte hard drive, which hard drive he has not returned. Let's stop there. That's the 1 terabyte hard drive that you realized after the fact the IT department had, correct?
Oh, no, we identified that earlier.
Okay. So we'll pass through the capacity of what that had. And then you also identify you misappropriated and upon demand returned a hard drive with a capacity of 250 gigabytes. We'll hold off on that for a moment. And then the last one you say you also misappropriated a 500 gigabyte hard drive. I'm sorry, that was on the bottom of page 10. I skipped over that. So after the terabyte one, which you found in the IT department, you would say Frame also attached a 500 gigabyte hard drive, which is unaccounted for, and had the capacity to hold an additional 100 million pages of documents. And that's the 500 gigabyte hard drive you found in his desk drawer, correct?
In his top left-hand drawer.
Right.
I found it myself, yes.
Okay. And then, I think you remember sort of one of the comical moments during the deposition. You were in the deposition of Mr. Frame, correct?
I was there, yes.
Right. And do you remember when we were looking through the 9 boxes and a flash drive fell out of one of the binders right in the middle of the deposition? Do you remember that happening?
It was attached to one of those things that wear around your neck into the binder.
Oh.
It's dangling, yes.
All right. Now, I want to talk about the 250 gigabyte hard drive that Mr. Frame returned, and you authorized Mr. Lino to do an analysis of that 250 gigabyte hard drive, correct?
No, Mr. Our General Counsel, Mark Schaefer did.
And to your knowledge, Mr. Lino has not concluded that any information was copied off of that hard drive, right?
I'm not sure what you mean by copy.
Mr. Lino concluded, to your knowledge, Mr. Lino concluded that any information was copied off of, uploaded, downloaded, otherwise misappropriated off of that hard drive. He hasn't given you any conclusion to that effect, correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object only to the extent that Mr. Lino testified yesterday, and that might be mischaracterizing his testimony.
I'm telling you, it was Mr.
I don't
Lino.
exactly remember what Mr. Lano testified to as far as that hard drive.
I think what Mr. Lino testified to is that there are various ways to copy documents, and we can only verify certain kinds.
I think he's asked if he knows if everything was copied or not.
Yeah, I'm asking, are you aware of anything being copied off of that 250 gigabyte hard drive?
I'm not aware of that.
And the only conclusion you have drawn, and I think you relate to this court, is that with respect to that returned hard drive, there's a lot of Sargent information on that device, right?
That's what I've indicated, yes.
But you also will agree with me, Mr. Guest, that it appears to you that the Sargent information on that hard drive was put on that hard drive by Mr. Frame in the normal course of his working for Sargent, right?
I don't know. I don't know how it got there, or when he put it on. If it was 6 months ago, a year ago, or just recently.
Page 56, line 13, referring to that hard drive. Do you know, Mr. Guest, why that information, whether or not that information was put on that hard drive by Mr. Frame in the normal course of his business working for Sargent? After it appears. I now want to refer you to the answer to interrogatory number 10. Maybe we're perhaps still on there.
Is that the one on page 10?
I think it's on page 11, sir.
Okay.
And I talked to you about this deposition, and the words here were that about halfway down, Frame, Boss, and those acting in concert with them plundered and pillaged the data and information repositories of Sargent Electric while converting, stealing, and otherwise removing hundreds of thousands of documents, including not limited to a whole host of things. And to be clear, Mr. Gass, the basis for the plunder and pillage allegation is the 9 boxes, the missing USB devices, and the fact that the former Sargent employees are now employed by MJ Electric. Right? That's the basis for that accusation, correct?
No.
Page 59. I think I probably need to start at the top, actually on page 8. I'm sorry, page 59, line 8. Question. So again, trying to get each item here. The basis for your belief that they converted and stole hundreds of thousands of documents. You said the 9 baker's boxes. That's one of those, correct? Some objections. The 9 baker's boxes that we talked about earlier, correct? Answer, correct. The unaccounted for USB devices reflected in Mr. Lino's report, correct. And the fact that we sit here today, former Sargent employees, a number of them, are now employed by MJ Electric. Correct? Answer, correct. That's 3. Anything else? We're ongoing with forensic. As you sit here today, just those 3, off the top of my head, those are the 3 major, correct? Is there anything I can do to refresh your recollection that I can think of? No, talking is doing good, Rich. Those are the main 3.
We were at that time, as of today, which meant that day, but it was ongoing forensics and going through all this depositions and all the witnesses sitting up here. And additional information, Monosol in the context of also, I would say, would be added to that list of 3.
Mr. Getz, just so the record is clear, I took your deposition on June 12th, right?
Yes.
Take a look at Trial Exhibit 107, please. Let me know when you're there. Your Honor.
Yes.
Again, I move along, Mr. Guest. First page and last page. Recognize this document.
This is my signature. Again, I don't remember the document all over here.
Okay, this is an amended verified complaint, but you also verified this one, correct, on the last page?
I did, correct.
And I'd like you to look at paragraph 8, which is on page 2, going on to page 3. Are you there, Mr. Guest?
Yes.
And in this allegation, basically state that MJ Electric, this is towards the bottom of 3, 2 onto 3, conceived a scheme, right? You suggest they conceived a scheme to open and quickly staff an NWI office by systematically rating the management and key employee ranks of Sargent Electric. And again, your factual basis for that very serious allegation are the 9 boxes, the unaccounted for USB devices, and again, the fact that these employees were at Sargent Electric and now they're at MJ, right?
Well, I believe there's more to it than just those couple items.
Page 70. Line 4. Can you describe, Mr. Guest, what you meant here by the words conceived a scheme to open and quickly staff an NWI office by systematically rating the management and key employee ranks of Sargent Electric? What is your factual basis for saying that that was a scheme to do that? Currently employed by MJ, there's 12 employees of 13 that previously worked at Sargent. Anything other than that? They stole our people and our information. Well, let's talk about that. So your basis for the allegation, there was a scheme that there are now, I don't know the exact number, for the sake of discussion, approximately 12 people that were formerly at Sargent and are now at MJ Electric. Answer. That's one. Question. And the other one is you said they stole your information. Answer. And 2. Question. And I apologize if we're going over new ground, but I'm trying not to. They stole your information. Who is the they in that sentence that you're referring to? Answer. That would be Frame, Voss, Alberson, Mann, Simmons, Schumann, Kimball, Jeff Schumann. What is your factual basis if you believe that these individuals stole Sargent's information? Answer. As to the best of my knowledge that I have, they stole the 66 devices. They removed the 9 boxes unauthorized from our office, and they acquired our people. So when you say they stole the information, I'm trying to make sure, again, we're on the same page, sort of physically, are you talking about information you're referring to, the missing hard drives reflected in Mr. Lyon's report? Answer, USB. Question, USB, I apologize, thank you for the correction. Missing USB drives? Yes. Answer, correct. And the 9 boxes? Correct. Any other factual basis for your belief that any of those individuals physically, stole or took any of Sargent's information? Those 66 devices? Okay. And the 9 boxes? That's the evidence I have, and the 9 boxes are employees. Now let's talk about those missing USB devices. The factual basis for... Sorry?
You're still reading?
The factual basis for your allegation that Voss and Frame, because you also allege in the same complaint that they used Sargent's confidential and proprietary information in order to compete with Sargent while they were employed with Sargent. Remember that allegation?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and again, factual basis for that accusation are the missing USB devices and the 9 boxes, right?
That's part of it, yes.
And you believe that these USB devices were, quote, stolen from Sargent, right?
They didn't go returned.
Okay, you believe that they were stolen from Sargent, right?
Can't find them, they haven't been returned.
Is that yes or no? Do you believe they were stolen?
Well, I think that one device was returned to us, and one appeared in the left-hand drawer of Mr. Frame's. Some other ones, even listening to some of the witnesses, have them at home.
let's see, I'll just go page 74. Line 7. Question. Just so we're clear, in Mr. Lino's report, I believe he said that those are missing or unaccounted for. That's what Mr. Lino is. They've never been returned to us. Correct. You have used the word many times in this definition that something was stolen or steal, etc. What's your basis for saying that those devices were stolen, other than the fact that they cannot currently be located? We don't have them. They were never returned. They're stolen. You're just assuming that these former Sargent employees have these 40-some missing USB devices, right?
I don't know where they're at today.
And in the course of your investigation, you're aware that Sargent has off-site trailers at various sites, correct, in Northwest Indiana?
We do.
And I take it you never went out to any of those trailers and looked at the USB devices there, right? You didn't look for them there?
I did not.
And in fact, you didn't go out and interview those employees at the off-site trailers to ask them, hey, you have any USB devices? Can you see what you have? We're looking for a few that are missing. You never did that, right, Mr. Guest?
I did not personally know.
And the fact of the matter is that as far as the 40 devices, you have no idea who has those devices, right, Mr. Guest?
No, I just know whose laptops they were plugged into.
Now, while Mr. Ross and Mr. Frame were still employed by Sargent, you have no basis to believe that they were meeting with any customers and attempting to divert work to MJ Electric while they were still employed by Sargent. There's no basis to accuse them of that, correct?
I don't know what they were working on.
Do you have any basis to accuse them of meeting with customers and attempting to divert work to MJ Electric while they were still employed by Sargent? The answer is you don't, correct?
The only one I can think of that they worked on is the monosol project. Besides that, I don't.
And also to your knowledge, Mr. Guest, while Mr. Voss and Mr. Frame were with Sargent, you're not aware that they were meeting with any prospective customers trying to steer them over to MJ, right?
Obviously, I don't know what they were working on. No.
Now, while you certainly have told the court numerous times that your theory is that because some of the former employees, you think some of these former employees possess Sargent's confidential information, that's your theory, right?
I didn't say it's been proven more than theory.
Well, you have no factual basis, none, for an accusation that MJ Electric is actually using any of that information when it puts together its own bids, right?
Just monosol line 18.
We'll talk about monosol line 18. Let's put that in separate categories. I have a series of questions for that. So, other than monosol line 18, you have no factual basis for your accusation that MJ Electric is using any Sargent information when it puts together its own bids, right?
It's just probably the contacts are very helpful because you're able to talk to those contacts and then ask certain questions. It helps to maneuver within a organization. You go to the right player, you know who to talk to.
I'll follow up with you about contacts and monosol, promise. But in fact, you're going to agree with me, yes, that you don't know what information MJ Electric used when it's put together its bids for new projects, right? You don't know.
I have no access to their information.
Let's talk about monosol line 18 since you brought it up. You believe that Mr. Simmons was working on this proposal, the budgetary pricing. This is Exhibit 13, so I want to make sure that's in front of the court. And you can open up to it as well, Mr. Guest.
I'm sorry, which one?
Trial Exhibit 13, sir.
I'm sorry.
Right?
I did not make that noise. Paul, I'm sure.
I've given it to lots of people.
I'll take it. That's okay.
He has the correct one. I have the right one.
Short straw. Let's talk about Monticello line 18. You're on the exhibit 17. Your Honor, I assume you're there.
I'm there.
Before. Terrific. You believe that Mr. Simmons was working on this using the ConNet system before he left, right?
He was working on it. That's why he was at Sargent.
And you believe that he was doing this work on behalf of MJ Electric because the information, to your knowledge, was never transferred to anyone else at Sargent during Mr. Simmons' exit interview, right?
I can't say he was working on it at that time for MJ. He was working for Sargent Electric on this proposal.
And you don't know why he was working on this proposal, right?
I wasn't aware he was working on it or the reason why. No.
Okay, because I was going to say, you can't read Mr. Simmons' mind, so you don't know why he was working on this proposal, correct?
You're correct.
Okay, and actually looking at Exhibit 13, you don't know what it is, right?
What it is takeoff, and it goes all the way from step one to the very end where the final price is put together on it. And runs through all the, what we would call the industry takeoff through the estimate and do the final price.
Okay. So this isn't a bid or a proposal, we can agree on that. You don't know, you're not saying it's a bid or a proposal, correct?
Well, I don't know if it was a budget, a bid, a proposal. It's not noted that way.
You don't know if this is for new work, an extension, a modification. You just don't know what this is, right?
I don't have the backup to it. You're correct.
And you can't draw any conclusion from just this document as to what it is or why Mr. Simmons was putting it together, correct?
You're correct. I never had conversations with him about this.
And Mr. Guest, you're not very familiar with the prior work that Sargent even did for Monticello, right?
Well, it was for the history. I mean, I was obviously not there during this period. I was with Sargent for approximately 4 months. So I had to do some history and see when we first started.
Now, you heard the testimony from Mr. Simmons this morning where Mr. Simmons testified that the individual from Monticello, Tim Boyle, reached out to MJ Electric and to Mr. Simmons to set up a meeting and asked MJ Electric to work on a bid for line 18. You were in the courtroom. You heard Mr. Simmons say that, correct?
I did hear him say that today.
And I believe it's your view. Let me ask you this. The customer, you would agree with me, has a choice of who they want to hire to work on a project with them, right? It's up to the customer. You would agree on that.
Our clients have a choice.
And you wouldn't even agree, we'd have to agree, certainly, Mr. Guest, that it's possible for MJ Electric to put together a bid for Monticello Line 18 without using any of Sargent's confidential information, right?
Well, you could put together a bid. Right.
And certainly you don't know, even though you worked there before, you've already testified, you don't know how MJ Electric operates, so you don't know how they're putting together bids these days, right?
I left there right at the beginning of 2010, so I wouldn't know what they're doing today.
And you would agree that a customer gets to choose who they want to work for them, and you would also agree they get to choose who they want to give their drawings to, correct?
That's correct.
Let's talk about some of the work out of the East Chicago office. You are not aware, Mr. Guest, of any bid opportunities that were passed up by the East Chicago office in the last quarter of 2013, right?
In the last quarter? No, I mean, I wasn't privy to that daily operation.
So you have no basis to believe that either Mr. Frank, or Mr. Voss were taking advantage of every possible bid opportunity that presented itself in the last quarter of 2013. You have no reason to dispute that they weren't continuing to take on those bid opportunities and continued to bid work in the last quarter of 2013, right? You have no basis to dispute that, do you?
I just didn't have the opportunity to bid Mossall 18. That's the only project I'm aware of.
Okay, and as you sit here today, Mr. Guest, you have no knowledge that anyone from Mossall contacted anyone at Sargent prior to February 10th and even asked Sargent to put together a bid for line 18, right?
All I can go by, we have an estimate here that was worked on in our office by an employee at Sargent Electric. I don't know if it was submitted or not.
Are you aware, Mr. Guest, I'll ask my question again, we'll phrase it this way, you are not aware, okay, no one has told you, you have no knowledge that anyone from Mossall came to Sargent Electric and asked them to bid on Mossall line 18 prior to February 10th. You have no knowledge that happened, correct?
I don't know who they spoke to. Obviously, they spoke to someone on Mossall line 18 in our office. At what point? I'm not sure if it was 3 months ago, 8 months ago, or I just don't know.
You just don't know.
No, I can only go by what I see.
So based off that piece of paper, no, it's okay. My apologies, I interrupted you. So based on trial exhibit 13, right? You see that, and your conclusion is that MJ Electric stole a Mossall line 18 opportunity because of the existence of that document, right?
What I mean is, we never had the opportunity. This wasn't passed on before in an exit interview to anybody within Sargent before Mr. Simmons left.
Let's take a look at Exhibit 1, please. Yes. I want to focus you on page 3, please, sir.
I think I have 2 page 1s.
Agreed. In this exhibit, the third page of the exhibit, which I think probably is technically page 2 of the analysis. Well, the chart that you were talking about with Ms. King. Right there?
Well, that chart is actually on page 2.
Fair enough. So make sure we're on the same page. The one that starts with historic recurring revenue and it lists 5 customers there. Actually, lists 4 customers there. Are you on that page?
That's page 2 in my book.
Fair enough. Certainly you agree with me, Mr. Guest, that those customers listed there, BP Whiting, USS, ArcelorMittal, NIPSCO, they use other electrical contractors besides Sargent, right? Sargent doesn't have any sort of exclusivity agreement with them where they only can use Sargent for projects in 2014, right? No such exclusivity agreement exists, right?
Not quite that good, no. We're not that lucky to have that.
And other competitors in Northwest Indiana are certainly free to take their shot and try to get some of that business, right? So it's a free market, right?
Well, I would say they have to be pre-qualified, go through the pre-qualification stage, go through the stages we talked about earlier, the contact stages, then get to the pre-qualifications, talking to the right people. And that's the normal process. So I wouldn't just say anybody.
Well, these customers put out what's known as RFPs, request for proposals, and request for bids, right? They put those out, correct?
Yeah, they usually put out to select people that are pre-qualified to work within their facility, that understand their facility.
And it's certainly safe to assume that these customers put out the RFPs in order to get competitive bidding for more than one contractor, right?
And sometimes they'll go 2, 3 contractors to get competitive bids.
Let's talk a little bit about contacts. Mr. Frame, you agree with me, has been in the business for, over 30 years, correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
And Mr. Voss, over 25 years?
That's my understanding.
And Mr. Frame has been in this market in Northwest Indiana for that entire time, that's your understanding?
Yes.
And in fact, when Mr. Frame left, you tried to convince him to stay, didn't you?
I did. I asked him to if he would reconsider staying. I did.
Sure, and during your conversation with Mr. Frame, you said to him, quoting you, "You're a key player at Sargent Electric, with all your contacts in the industry and all your knowledge at Sargent." That's what you told Mr. Frame, right?
I did say that, yes.
And in fact, at a function in December of 2013, it was Mr. Frame who actually introduced you to some of the contacts that he had developed over the years, right?
We were at a dinner party, and I met some people there, a few contacts, people I haven't talked to since. Yes.
And you will agree with me that it's part of Mr. Frame's job, obviously, to meet people and develop business for Sargent, correct? That was part of his job?
That was part of his responsibilities, correct.
And also, well, Mr. Voss was employed by Sargent as part of his job to develop business for Sargent, correct?
Business development was part of it, correct.
And you're not aware of any examples, when Sargent provided a lead or a contact name to Mr. Voss or Mr. Frame, right?
At the time we left, I'd only been there 4 months. I can't say that. I was still learning a lot of the contacts myself.
And it's fair to say that employees certainly develop contact information such as the name and phone number or the email of a customer. They certainly do so in the course of their employment, correct? That's Sargent?
Absolutely. That's how we drive business, knowing the knowledge of the people to maneuver through the contact and get those RFP opportunities.
Sure. And if they leave and take nothing with them, it is your view that they still cannot use that contact information, even if the information is in their head, right? That's your view, Mr. Guest?
My view is that one person leaves, that's a hit, especially at a very senior role. But when you have 8 of your top individuals, the combination of that knowledge, I believe that's questionable, because that's a lot of information. That's over 200 years of experience. And I do question it. I'm not a legal expert, but I do know the industry, and I know the impact that it has on us as a company. It has a huge impact on us as a company.
Talk about the impact in a moment. Page 200, line 6. As long as they don't take your contact information, if they otherwise have the contact information in their head, and they know the guy's phone number, name and phone number, is that okay for them to then contact them, being the customers? Answer, no. Heard a guy named Jeremy Smith?
Yes, I did.
Sargent recently hired Mr. Smith, didn't he?
About 3-4 weeks ago, he came on in our Northwest Indiana division.
And prior to working for Sargent, Mr. Smith worked with me, right?
He did, yes.
One of Sargent's competitors in the Northwest Indiana area is me, correct?
They are, yes.
And at the time he left me, he was doing work for BP, right?
I believe he was working on the BP site.
And you certainly don't believe there's anything wrong with Mr. Smith leaving me and coming to join Sargent, right?
Not one individual, no.
Sure. And Sargent has not placed any restrictions on Mr. Smith as far as what he can or cannot work on now that he's with Sargent, right?
What do you mean by restrictions?
You're free to put Mr. Smith on any projects you want to. There's no restrictions on what Mr. Smith can or can't do for Sargent, or customers he can or can't work on. There are no restrictions, right?
He's working on various customers, including BP.
So, if you were just response to one of my yes or no questions, you went into something about, well, there's only one, but now there's more than one have left, and then that's problematic to you. But let's try to break that down, Mr. Guest. These folks are all union employees, right?
Not Mr. Smith, no.
Okay, I'm talking about the folks that are the subject of this litigation. Mr. Voss, he's free to leave, right?
Yeah, he's not a union employee.
Agreed. Mr. Frame, he was free to leave, right? You go in.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's right. And the 6 employees, the 2 Schumans, Manning, Simmons, Alberson, Cabela, they were all free to leave, right?
Yeah, they didn't have any non-competes.
Yeah, and they could have fired them, too, right?
We could.
Absolutely. None of them signed a non-compete, and they were certainly free to quit and go and work for one of Sargent's competitors, right?
Yes.
and they're free to quit Sargent, join a competitor, and even work on the same customers that they worked on while they were at Sargent, so long as they don't utilize Sargent's confidential information. You would agree with that, right, Mr. Guest?
Could be a fair statement.
Okay. Now, so Mr. Boss is free to leave. Frame is free to leave. 6 other employees were free to leave. So they were all free to leave. None of them had non-competes. None of them had non-solicitations. They're all allowed to work for competitors, and they're all allowed to work on the same customers they worked on with Sargent, so long as they don't utilize Sargent's confidential information. So I guess what you're saying, Mr. Guest, is 1, 2, 3, 8 rights make a wrong.
Mischaracterizes his testimony.
Okay.
I'll draw the question. Sargent did not have any separate customer database that it maintained on its server, right?
We don't have a CRM system, if that's what you're referring to.
So to the extent that individuals at Sargent maintain contact information for customers, actually you don't know where those individuals maintain that information, right?
People maintain them in a lot of different locations. They kept them on their laptops, they kept them in spreadsheets, they kept them in a Word document. So there's quite a few areas that they kept their list of contacts.
Well, you actually just don't know where they kept them, right?
Not every individual, I do not.
And you're certainly aware that, you talked about, and I have to agree with you on this, Mr. Guest, that this community is a very tight-knit community, right? The electrical contractor community in Northwest Indiana, very tight-knit. It's a phrase you use, correct?
It is.
And you're aware that the employees of Local 697, the union members of 697, they move around a lot and they work for different electrical contractors in the area, right?
I suppose they do. I'm new to the area myself.
I want to talk briefly about Jim Nance, someone who is not testified here today, but he's one of the 6 employees who previously worked at Sargent and now is working at MJ Electric, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
And you, Mr. Ament, when Mr. Frame and Mr. Boss left, you were fielding applications or considering people for the operations manager position, correct?
Oh, that's correct.
And Mr. Manis applied for that position, right?
He did.
And his resume was considered by Sargent, but the committee that was considering resumes rejected Mr. Manis as a candidate at that time, correct?
He did. That committee did.
And in addition to just submitting his resume, Mr. Manis came and had a conversation with you about wanting to be considered for this position, correct?
He did speak to me about it, yes.
And during that meeting, you told him, in no uncertain terms, that he currently was not being considered for that position, correct?
I believe I did say that, yes.
And Mr. Manis, understandably, expressed disappointment that he was not being considered, and he actually thought it was a poor way for Sargent to make a selection, correct?
That was his opinion.
And you also had a conversation with Jeff Schuman before he left, right?
I did, yes.
And Mr. Schuman had expressed to you that he was upset that he wasn't considered for the operations manager position, right?
He didn't submit his resume for it.
He expressed to you that he was upset that he wasn't considered, correct?
Yeah, after the committee meeting, he didn't understand why, and I asked, why didn't you submit your resume? I didn't know you were interested.
Well, later, actually, you did offer him the position, correct?
We did have a meeting after that, yes.
And even after Mr. Jeff Schuman initially rejected it, you sweetened the offer, right?
Well, I offer a little more of a base.
And again, he rejected it, correct?
He did, yes.
So you recall Mr. Simmons. Mr. Simmons took less money to come to MJ Electric. Is that your understanding?
I don't know what he's going to pay at MJ.
Let's talk about Paul Schuman. Shortly after Mr. Voss and Mr. Frame left, you had a conversation with Mr. Schuman where he expressed to you his desire to work on big projects and he'd like to travel, right?
He did, yes.
But in February of 2014, when all this was happening, there wasn't an opportunity for Mr. Schumann, Paul Schumann at Sargent, that involved both travel and a big project, right?
Not that day. However, I explained to him we were working on probably one of the largest projects in the country. The only nuclear power plant that's being constructed, and another project in Texas. But we didn't have them secure as of that date.
And at that time, he was working on the BP project, and that project was winding down, right?
I mean, the major project was winding down, but we still had work going on at BP, and we continue to work on BP.
Right. In fact, that's right. You continue to do work at BP, right?
We have a very skilled staff there right now.
Continue to do work for ArcelorMittal, right?
We are.
Continue to do work for NIPSCO, correct?
We're doing some work up there.
Great. And you continue to do some work for U.S. Steel, right?
We have a skeleton. No, we just finished the ball, but we do have a crew there, yes.
And you've hired someone to replace Mr. Voss, correct?
We have an interim individual right now.
Taking over Mr. Voss's responsibilities, correct?
Part of them, yes.
And you've distributed Mr. Frame's responsibilities, right?
Our interims is kind of distributed around. We don't have enough people to go around right now. So I continue to come over here and continue to support it.
Did you ever hear of a guy named Greg Kreiser?
Yes,
He's been at Sargent for 25 plus years.
yes.
He works at U.S. Steel.
Yes, yes.
He's a seasoned guy. He works on the bids for all the BP work, right?
I'm not sure exactly what he works on bid-wise.
Okay. Dave Dysart, he's been in Sargent for more than 25 years too, right?
He is, yes.
And he works at NIPSCO?
Location?
Right. He's also a guy who's been around for 25 plus years. Prices and NIPSCO work. He can figure out pretty much anything. He's a bright guy. Do you agree? Or you don't know?
Well, I do know. I've sat on one of his bid reviews, and we had to redo it substantially. I don't know him well enough to say to what extent he can bid, but I would have a little concern on a major project.
Well, how about Dave Coots? He's also been at Sargent for 25 plus years, right? He's still there, correct?
He's still there.
He works at the ArcelorMittal location, right?
Well, you have me. I thought he was at BP.
Oh, maybe you have me, maybe I have you. I guess neither of us really know, right?
I don't agree with that, yes.
Okay, that's fair enough. Because you've only been with Sargent since October of 2013, right?
That's correct.
And prior to what's happened here on February 10th, maybe you made 2-3 trips out to the Chicago office prior to February 10th, right?
Prior to February 10th?
Yeah, prior to Mr. Voss and Mr. Frank meeting. Maybe you went out there 2 or 3 times, right?
I know 3 for sure. I'm not sure if there was a 4th. And then we came to Pittsburgh for a couple meetings. Yes.
I'll agree with you on 3. We'll go with 3 over the 4.5 plus months that you were there.
Okay.
So it's understandable if you don't necessarily know what all these guys are capable of doing. Glenn LaMantia, he's also been there for 25 plus years, right?
I have to say I don't know him.
Okay. Paul Zendiak, he's still there. You may have heard his name mentioned in the course of this trial, correct?
I do know Paul, yes.
Now, you also have a couple folks in T.R.O, Chuck Wheat and Bill Payton, both with 25 plus years experience. Familiar with them?
Yes, they're running the division down in T.R.O division.
Right. And certainly people, Sargent's been around for a long time. These guys have been with Sargent for 25 years. Certainly, Mr. Guest, they'd be willing to help out and help with estimating the East Chicago office if you asked him, right, sir?
We would. When we had free time, we do share back and forth as much as we can.
Now, there's also there's even some more folks in Pittsburgh. We've got Mike Armbrust. He's been a Sargent for more than 6 years and pretty smart guy as well. Agreed?
He's a sharp individual.
And Jared Zimmerman, he's been there for more than 6 years. He's also a smart guy.
He's a sharp individual. Yes.
And until very recently, you had Joe Connors, who had been with Sargent for 18 plus years, that he was the GM of estimating, correct? On the Pittsburgh office? Chief estimator?
Chief estimator.
Right. He quit in April, right?
He did, yes.
Now, you've talked a lot about Montisol today. Your one example, something you think improper may have happened. And after Mr. Frame and Mr. Voss left, you took it upon yourself to send out letters to a lot of Sargent customers, trying to let them know that things are okay. Remember that?
It was what I would call a group effort. Yes.
Sure, because other people gave you the names of the people to send out the letters to, right?
I guess I'm not clear on what letters you're talking about.
Fair enough. Not trying to hide anything here. Exhibit 110. I'm not sure if that's the broken binder. Or wait, Justin came through.
And which?
Try exhibit 110. It's a group exhibit.
I'm there.
And certainly, we'll see all these, but do you recognize this group exhibit? You look at the first letter, and then there's several behind it.
Oh, yes, I remember. Absolutely. I won't read them all. They're pretty similar.
Well, the court and I would appreciate you not reading them all. These are letters that you sent out after Mr. Frame, Mr. Voss left to a list of customers that were provided, those names were provided to you by somebody else, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And I'm not going to have you go through all this list, but fair enough, Mr. Guest, I don't think you're going to remember sending a letter to Montisol, did you?
I don't remember sending one to him.
Okay. Judge, the record will reflect that the trial exhibit 110 for about 50 letters none to Montisol. Sargent did, however, attempt to set up a meeting with the president of Montisol regarding line 18, right?
We did, yes.
And it's your understanding that that president declined to meet with Sargent, right?
He originally accepted, and then a few days later he declined.
And following the departure of Mr. Voss and Mr. Frame, you cannot identify any projects where Sargent passed up a bid opportunity, correct?
That we passed up. I don't know what you're referring to. Did we pass up a bid that came into our office? Or?
You can't identify any projects where there was a bid opportunity presented to Sargent, and Sargent said, no thanks, I'm going to take a pass. You cannot identify any such situations, correct?
Your Honor, if I can just object to this form, I have no idea what time period he's talking about.
Fair enough. Fair objection. After Mr. Voss and Mr. Frame left.
Oh, we did have to pass on some, yes. We didn't have the capabilities. We just lost 6 of our 9. So I can tell you exactly what the jobs are. There are RFPs that came in. We went into crisis mode, and our estimators moved from estimating to project management. We had clients to serve. We had contracts that we had to fulfill. And our estimators, they could estimate. We did not have time, especially in the beginning.
Page 260, line 17. Are you aware specifically, Mr. Guest, of any projects that Sargent had the opportunity to bid on subsequent to Mr. Voss's and Mr. Frame's departure that Sargent chose not to bid on those projects? Answer, I don't know. And to your knowledge, Mr. Guest, Sargent never declined an invitation. And certainly Sargent's East Chicago office has bid on work since Mr. Frame and Mr. Voss have left, correct?
We are putting on some projects now, yes.
Sure, you've been awarded work since they left as well?
We're doing some work. I'm not sure exactly what we've landed.
Now, certainly you would agree with me, we talked about this a bit earlier, it's a free market. MJ Electric is free to open up space in Crown Point and compete with Sargent and all the other electrical contractors there. Certainly, they're free to do that, right?
Yes.
Okay. 'Cause I just want to make sure that they're allowed to do that in your mind, and they can compete with you, and with me, and with Hire, and with Continental, and all the other contractors that they choose. They're certainly free to put their hat in the ring and try to capture some of the business that's available to the contractors, right? They're free to try.
Everyone's free to try.
And you've talked about these folks having, when they're with Sargent Electric, access to Sargent's confidential information, right? I think you used the term access. So I want to make sure we can agree on something, Mr. Guest. Access doesn't equal stealing, right?
No.
Okay, and access also doesn't equal misappropriation, right?
Not access, no.
Okay. Because there's a big difference, Mr. Guest, between someone having access to information and someone actually stealing it, right?
I would suppose there's a difference.
I think it's more than suppose that. I certainly think there is, but let's actually take a look at a memo that you put your name to, that's Trial Exhibit 111. Actually, before we get to that, I want to turn your attention, I apologize for skipping around, Your Honor, if you can leave that open, but on another binder is Exhibit 16. I want to cover that briefly. You know when you're done, Mr. Guest, please. Thank you.
I'm on 16.
Great. And I believe when Ms. King was asking you a few questions, and if I'm mischaracterizing your testimony, please tell me. But I believe you said that you may have located on the 250 gigabyte hard drive that Mr. Frame returned a document similar to the pages attached to this May 1st letter.
I did say that, yes.
Okay. Now, can you also agree with me that the pages behind this letter, this is a form template provided by ArcelorMittal?
Oh, yes, it is.
It is. And it's something that, would you assume, since you might not have been there at the time, would you assume that Sargent may have submitted its rates to ArcelorMittal using this form document, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go back to Exhibit 111.
I'm there.
This is a memo that you at least partially drafted, correct, Mr. Guest?
Yes, along with our general counsel and a couple other people.
Right. Mr. Broom and Mr. Date, they had a part in this too?
They did.
Can you identify the titles of Mr. Broom and Mr. Date for the court, please?
This period, Mr. Groom is the CEO, Mr. Dake is the chairman, Sargent.
Thank you. And this memo was sent out to all of the Sargent employees, right?
Yes.
About 400 people,
Approximately, yes.
give or take. And here, you accuse Mr. Voss and Mr. Frame and MJ Electric of intentionally disrupting Sargent's operations.
Your Honor, if I can interpose an objection. We're here today, and I know that we keep on going down this road where it's like a trial, but we're here today for a motion for preliminary injunction. And certainly, if Rich was going to ask questions that related to our motion, then that's acceptable. But to the extent that it's going outside the scope of what we're requesting here today, I don't think that it's relevant, and frankly, like the court not to waste more time on that.
I don't know where he's going.
Judge, a little attitude, I'm going to the basis for his very serious allegations against my clients. And because of those allegations is why we're here today, Judge.
Well, Your Honor, respectfully, that's not really true because they've now filed a counterclaim and a third-party complaint against my client relative to defamation that my client still hasn't even responded to. We're here today only on the motion for preliminary injunction, and I know we've been here so long it feels like a trial, but unfortunately at this point we're not there yet.
No, Your Honor. Either a little attitude or I continue to argue my points to the court. I don't want to
Overruled. Go ahead.
And in this memo, you allege that MJ Electric, boss, and frame, I want to make sure I have the quote correct. Second sentence, second paragraph. Quote, we have now learned, or actually we now have learned, that their sudden and unexpected departure, referring to boss and frame, is carefully orchestrated with their new employer, MJ Electric, to create as much disruption as possible to our NWI employees, business, and operations. Okay? You had a part in writing that, correct?
I don't know if I wrote that
Well, you
exact
certainly,
sentence, but I did proofread it. Yes.
okay, and you certainly put your name on this document, right, Mr. Gadsden?
Yes.
All right. And then you go on to the second sentence of the third paragraph. You say, in no uncertain terms, we are disappointed to discover that they, Boston Frame, also took massive amounts of confidential and proprietary information with them, including estimates, proposals, employee records, and financial data. See that?
I do.
And this went out, memo went out sometime early March time period, give or take?
Gosh, almost the first or second week of March.
And when you wrote this, certainly Mr. Lino had not even yet completed his investigation, correct?
He didn't complete it, but there was a lot of information, and our general counsel was handling at that time that led us to this conclusion.
Right, and that's right. What led you to the conclusion, and what you based the accusation on of the discovery that they took massive amounts of confidential proprietary information is, once again, I apologize in advance for beating a dead horse, but you are relying on the 9 boxes and the missing USB devices, right?
And in that device, there was a return Mr. Frame, excuse me, a 250 gigabyte device that was turned over to our counsel.
Okay, so the 9 boxes, the device Mr. Frame returned, and the missing USB devices. And then to support your accusation that MJ Electric stole the employees. By the way, are the employees property of Sargent Electric?
Employees property?
Yeah, their property? There's no indentured servitude that I'm not aware of. Is there?
No, I hope not.
So do I, sir.
No.
So do I. I agree. And to support your accusation that MJ Electric stole employees, again, you're relying on the 9 boxes and the forensic information, right?
I'm sorry, if I could just interpose something, I don't see the word steal anywhere in here. And I certainly might be missing it.
Actually referring to the statement he made in his deposition.
Oh, I thought you were still referring to it.
Fair enough, counsel. Sorry for the confusion. To support your accusation, sir, that MJ Electric stole employees, you're relying on the 9 boxes and the forensic information, correct?
In the business analysis. Again, our counsel is handling the forensics at that particular time.
Page 283, line 16. So to support your accusation that MJ Electric stole these employees that were free to leave, you're relying on the 9 boxes and the results of your forensic expert's report. Answer. Same answer as before. It's the 9 boxes and the forensic information.
I believe the forensic information
There's no
was the
question.
business plan.
Your Honor, doesn't he have a right to answer the question?
Please answer it. Okay.
And just finally, I think you might remember, Mr. Guest, because you've been sitting here for the whole trial. Since the testimony of the witnesses and certainly your counsel's arguments, you think there's uncertainty out there. You don't know, you're worried, but you don't know what's going on or what might happen or what could happen, but you're concerned, right? You're concerned.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And you're concerned because when you get another player in the market here, they are going to be going after someone in the same business you are, and they might be able to capture some share of the market, right? It's possible? Possible?
They're going after our share of the market. You're absolutely right.
And Mr. Kelly talked about, I think it was when he was reading in some deposition designations about ethics and morality. And my question for you, Mr. Guest, is do you think it's ethical or moral to accuse someone of stealing without a firm factual basis for making that accusation?
Your Honor, I'm going to judge that as soon as that's not evidence.
I'll withdraw the question, Your Honor.
Okay.
And just to be clear, Mr. Guest, with all that's happened here, and the people leaving, and 8 employees decided to go into a different direction, is it even possible that maybe it's something that Sargent may have done to make these folks decide they wanted to go into a different direction? Is that possible, sir?
I'm going to object to based on speculation. He's not inside those employees' heads as you told him earlier.
You're right. You can't make decisions for them. I have nothing further here.
Okay.
Your Honor, I do have some redirects. It shouldn't take long if you want to get this witness done today.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Guest, you spoke with Attorney Silver about your leaving from MJ Electric, right?
I did, yes.
And when you left MJ Electric, you didn't quit, did you?
No, my position was eliminated.
Did other employees leave with you?
No.
Did you take any USB devices or other confidential information from MJ Electric?
No, I didn't do that.
How long has it been since you left MJ Electric?
Gosh, it's been 4 years, so 4.5 years now.
Would it be fair to say that you have more memory or knowledge of MJ Electric's business operations 4 years ago, right after you left, than you do as you sit here today?
It's late, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I really did.
It's been 4
I
years.
apologize.
It's been 4 years since you left MJ Electric, right?
It has.
So let's say within a couple of months after you left MJ Electric, do you still have a pretty good working knowledge of maybe some of their business operations?
You do.
A better one than you do now, would that be fair?
Yes, my memory is better than, yes.
And there's also discussion about strategic plans that go to bidding, I think. Do you remember that discussion?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a difference in the way that strategic plans play into bidding, which to me means customers, and I could be wrong, I'm not an electrical contractor, and the way that strategic plans play into estimating, i.e. putting a number together?
Yeah, there's a difference. Absolutely. You're targeting a particular job instead of maybe targeting a market sector or targeting what you want to do as a company plan based on forecasts and where you want to go.
Okay, but that strategic plan doesn't play into estimating, right? Into how you actually prepare an estimate.
The later one, no.
Okay.
Definitely not.
And you were also presented with Exhibit 155, which is the initial complaint we filed in this manner. You remember that?
I do.
Okay. And you were actually specifically presented with the last, I apologize, the last page of that exhibit, and you said that that was your signature on that exhibit, right?
Correct.
Okay. Prior to your signature, do you have that exhibit up?
I do not. Paul, I'm not even there. Is that 155?
It is.
I do not. Please. I have that.
You got the last page open?
I do.
At the end of that verification, can you read me the last sentence of that verification, actually?
By the under verification, I verify that statements made in the foregoing complaint are true and correct to the best of my knowledge, information, and belief.
Okay. So when defense attorney was questioning about that earlier, about how these are, as the allegations in the complaint, that there's not even a reference to information, knowledge, and belief, there is a reference, right?
There is in fact that I just read.
We're also presented with Exhibit 106.
Would you like to look that one
I
up?
would. I would like you to go to the second to last page of that. Similar language to the complaint? Knowledge, information, and belief?
It's a little bit different.
Okay, that's knowledge and belief, right?
Correct.
Okay. And what's that dated, that signature? Do you see how it was notarized?
Yeah, so the notary down below is the 24th of April, 2014.
And in your discussions with defendant's counsel, he specifically referred you, I think, to information about Mr. Frame's misappropriation of various USB devices and about the fact that we found one in a desk drawer and one was owned by the Sargent IT, right?
Correct.
Did you know that at the time you signed these?
I did definitely the first one, and the second one I don't believe also.
Okay. In fact, when you were deposed, you said that actually that wasn't correct any longer because you had learned of additional information, right?
I had one, and part of the deposition is set.
And defendant's counsel asked you about the flash drives that comically fell out of the banker's boxes during Mr. Frame's deposition. You remember that?
I do remember that, yes.
Did you instruct someone to check those flash drives to see if they represented any of the missing devices?
Actually, there's three.
Mm-hmm.
They were enclosed in binders, like a binder like this, and there were three different instances when we were logging them in that there were three USB devices. Those devices were checked for serial numbers against Mr. Engel's report, and they did not match.
Okay, so none of those three USB devices contained in the baker's boxes or any of the devices referenced by Mr. Engel's report, right? Is that what you just said?
That's what I just said. We're still looking for.
And you also discussed with defendant's counsel the fact that none of these devices have been able to be found then, right?
Not today.
But we know where 7 of them have been, don't we?
We didn't. They were plugged into MJ's equipment
And how do you know that?
by their forensic expert.
Mr. Gus, I'm also going to refer you to Exhibit 107. Let me know when you're there.
It's 107.
Can you go to the last page of that exhibit?
On the last page.
Is there that knowledge, information, and belief language in that as well?
It is.
You were also questioned about confidential and proprietary information that Mr. Voss and or Mr. Frame might have used to compete with Sargent while employed. Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay, and I think specifically that might have referenced paragraph 10 of the amended complaint.
I remember our big question about paragraph.
Do you remember on direct about how we talked about the GOAT review?
Yes, we did.
Is that a good example?
It would be a good example.
You also discussed with defendant's counsel the fact that you didn't have any actual knowledge as to solicitation of employees while Mr. Frame was employed by Sargent, right?
Not off the top of my head.
Sure. Did Mr. Albertson tell you anything about Mr. Frame discussing leaving with him?
He did. He shared he came to me and said today would be his last day. And I asked him to sit down and let's talk.
I'm sorry, Mr. Guys, can you speak up?
I did. And
Or
so,
get closer?
I'll do both.
Thank you.
So I asked Mr. Alpert to sit down and discuss with me what his plans are, why he's leaving. And he had mentioned to me during that conversation that in mid-December, he gave me, that he had turned in his resignation to Mr. Frame and that he would be leaving sometime at the beginning of the year, 2014. And then Mr. Frame asked him to stay on, and I don't know the exact words, something to the effect that changes are going to be happening. I would like to see you stay on the Sargent Electric until those changes occur. And I didn't ask him what those changes were going to be, and he didn't share them with me during the conversation.
So, and Albertson told you this, and that story happened when both Mr. Frame and Mr. Albertson were Sargent Electric employees, right?
Well, he mentioned the mid-December date, and that would be exiting at the end of the year.
Okay, so but Mr. Albertson was an employee at the end of December, correct? at Sargent
He was
Electric?
still an employee. He never left Sargent Electric.
And Mr. Frame was as well?
He was, yes.
Do you think that that would be a specific example
What?
of Mr. Frame's solicitation of employees while still employed by Sargent Electric?
All I can say is he didn't give me the exact specifics. He just said that hang in there and changes are going to be occurring. And I don't know what he meant by that, but he mentioned that to Mr. Albertson. And it possibly could be.
And the defendant's counsel asked you about whether or not you looked for USB devices at trailers, right? Remember that?
Yes.
Are you the one actually conducting the forensic investigation?
No, as I mentioned earlier, our General Counsel, Mark Schaefer, is heading that up with our IT.
You also had a discussion with the defendant's counsel about how you don't know where the Sargent employees maintain their contacts or where they maintain their contacts, right? For every single employee.
No, I mentioned that it's in spreadsheets, it's on USB devices, some print them out, keep hard copies. There's no one single central location for all of them. Except for computer use does allow you to do a filter search, which is our software, and you can filter by client, and in there are customer contacts also.
But Sargent provides its employees with desktops and or laptops, right?
We do.
And then either a phone or a phone allowance, is that right?
Phone or phone allowance, yes.
And would you assume that the contacts are on any of those Sargent provided devices?
Typically it's for everybody's in some type of format.
And then if you could pull out Exhibit 2, I just have a quick question about that. Do you have it in front of you, Mr. Goss?
I do.
Defendant's counsel had asked you about information you might have about MJ using Sargent information, right?
Correct.
Have you seen this Exhibit 2 before?
I have during the case of our depositions.
And does this Exhibit 2 contain Sargent information?
It does.
And what's your understanding of how this information was used?
My understanding, this is shared.
Objection, lack of foundation. How would you have any personal knowledge of how this was used?
Well, he's the same.
Mr. Ross, he's there in all the depositions, so he's going to talk about what Mr. Voss and Mr. Frame have said during their depositions. That's what we're getting to at this point. Mr. Voss and Frame already testified. Mr. Voss at length about how this was used. I don't think Mr. Guess has any personal knowledge of how this was used.
You know what? That's my turn.
Okay.
There's Sargent information contained in this Exhibit 2, isn't there, Mr. Harris?
There's confidential information contained in this document.
And you don't, in fact, have any information as to why MJ or how MJ or if MJ has used Sargent information, right?
No, I don't know how MJ is using their information.
Because you don't have any personal knowledge of that, do you?
I do not have any personal knowledge.
Promise. Mr. Guest answered some questions in response to Ms. King's about where people keep their contact information. You mentioned a couple different places. Just want to recall, conversation you and I had at your deposition, page 177, line 16. So to the extent that people have individuals, so to the extent that people have individuals that Sargent have contact information for customers or friends, that would be on their Outlook contacts, or you don't know. Answer, I don't know. Talked about, Ms. King asked you some questions about, you had worked at MJ Electric about 4 years ago is when you left?
Approximately 4.5, yes.
Fair enough, and I forgot where the kind of 4 months came up, I forgot where she used that, but you talked earlier about that these folks these foreign employees, they don't have a non-compete, but you do with Sargent, don't you, Mr. Hicks, right?
Yes.
In fact, if you take a look at Trial Exhibit 109, right.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this. This is outside the scope of the redraft.
Not at all, Your Honor. She brought up the issue of the idea that he's been gone for 4 years, so, you know.
It's a Sargent non-compete.
Right. I'll throw it together, Your Honor.
Okay.
He is a non-compete currently. Sargent, Trial Exhibit 109, right?
109.
I'm going to their judge, let's take a moment, please.
I haven't gotten there.
No problem.
I'm there.
I'm there.
This is a copy of your current employment agreement with Sargent, right?
First, yes.
And taking a look at the 4th page of this exhibit, paragraph 6.
I'm trying to read the base stamp too.
Just go to the 4th page, that might be easier. Can I read the base stamp?
Okay.
Sure. The first paragraph is called restricted covenants. You see that?
Yes.
And this contains, generally speaking, a non-compete provision that you're subject to, correct?
Yes.
So if you were to leave Sargent, you got to sit on the sidelines for a year according to this and not engage directly or indirectly, etc., and compete with Sargent, correct, if you leave?
Within certain regions.
Sure. Right. For a year, you got to sit on the sidelines.
Right.
Right?
I could relocate.
Okay, you could relocate. But the former employees, they're not bound by any non-compete. They don't have to sit on the sidelines at all, do they? They can get right back in the game, can't they? Can't they, sir?
Your Honor, he's already testified to this. He testified to it on the record. He testified to it on call.
He did, counsel, he did.
Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Okay, anything else? Thank you, Mr. Getch. You can step down. Okay.
Your Honor, I know we've had a long day with that couple housekeeping issues.
Yes.
Are you going to want closing? And if so, are we going to...
Well, I have to do findings and conclusions and then by rule, so might want to just submit everything.
Well, Your Honor, can we do a brief...
If you want to do a brief summation.
Followed by at some point on, a date that works for the court proposed findings?
Right, that's what I was going to suggest.
Okay.
I mean, I'll let you two tell me how much time you need to submit them and go from there. So,
Okay.
you do it, what, 20 minutes each?
That's fine. We're 30. It's up to you.
Your Honor, just so you know, there are some additional witnesses that I think
At this point, we're going to close, Your Honor. So
you're resting?
yes.
Okay.
Actually, resting. I'm sorry.
right. So, Your Honor, a couple different options here. Obviously, we have, of course, ready to rule on the motion. We have different, 2 additional witnesses to put on the next couple of days. Then, in any event, it sounds like the court's going to propose findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Gotta have them.
Okay.
Gotta do well, unless you don't submit them, I still have to do them.
We'll take that wavering order from the court.
Okay, how many more witnesses do you have?
Based on today, Your Honor, we're going to regroup and try to cut down on the list. Certainly tomorrow, we have some folks from MJ Electric Management. Mr. Broccolo, who is back, is going to testify. Also, a gentleman from business manager from the local union, UW, Mr. Walker, has some short testimony. And we're hoping also to get through Mr. Nagy and possibly Mr. Dabb.
So we won't be done tomorrow.
No, Your Honor.
Doesn't look like it. Okay.
And then after that, Your Honor, we may or may not, I've got to talk to my co-counsel. The court has heard from 2 of the 6 employees who made the move. We may or may not want to call some of them to briefly tell their story. But the one witness, in addition to what I stated earlier, who will certainly be speaking at the court, is Mr. Wyatt, who is our forensic expert. So I certainly am cautiously optimistic that we can get done with the witnesses by the end of Wednesday.
As a housekeeping matter, we received this morning what was described as a supplemental report from Mr. Weil. So we'll decide, Your Honor, if we're going to object to that in the same way. There was objections to Mr. Leno talking about continuation of his review. It seems to me that it's wholly inappropriate. But the fact is, it might be of interest just to cross Mr. Weil. So we'll figure that out and let you know what we think about that.
So you're looking at going next week?
No.
So, Thursday will be done.
Yeah, absolutely. If we roll over to a little bit of Thursday, that would be the worst, Your Honor, but the goal is certainly to get this done as quickly as certainly before the holiday weekend.
All right. Okay, we'll see you in the morning.
Thank you very much. All rise.